first of all, today is August 15th, and so this is the day when Mary departed this life.
You know, I never knew that.
You never knew that.
You
I
always
never
learn
did either
something.
till I started working for the Orthodox Church.
You had to be raised Roman.
Pardon?
You had to be raised Roman.
Yeah.
Oh,
Know
okay.
that.
Oh,
Is that what you're
okay.
saying?
It was a holy day of obligation.
Oh, okay. Oh.
Was that feast yesterday?
It's today.
Oh, it is today.
Say, the whole festival is this whole weekend, but today is the
I
actual
always wanted to go to that.
15.
liturgical feast, yeah. Yeah, it's today. And in the Catholic Church, it's called the Feast of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin.
Right.
But in Orthodox and other places, in the Orthodox Church calls it the Dormition of Mary, or the falling asleep of Mary, which actually is, people used to say that all the time, you know, so-and-so is asleep in Jesus. You know, that's an
Yes,
old
yes.
phrase. Nowadays, they just say, well, they passed. I was like, past what? You know, past their proficiency, past their exam, past gas. I'm not sure what that is.
Passed out of the world.
But, yeah, we used to say they fell asleep in Jesus, and that's the way the Orthodox referred to it. She fell asleep, meaning she died. But the Catholic Church, my understanding is, they don't, they teach that Mary did not suffer the pains of death like the rest of us do, that she was taken into heaven, kind of like Elijah and Enoch in the Old Testament. She just was taken up into heaven without suffering death. Am I close on that anyway?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And then they, when I was raised, they had it, they called it a triduum,
Triduum, the 3-day.
3 day. And
Yeah.
all the older boys would get out and would march around the grotto, and
Okay.
it was a big deal.
Yeah. Because there's an Assumption Church in Akron, isn't there? No, it's Annunciation in Akron.
Annunciation.
Annunciation.
And they changed that. It's something else now.
Okay.
And they combined.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, the church I worked for in St. Louis was the Assumption Greek Orthodox Church, which the pastor, you know, Father Peter said, it's not the right name because Orthodox don't believe in Assumption. It should be the Dormition of the Theotokos Greek Orthodox Church, but that's just too long. Yeah, you're right. So we got to St. Louis in June-ish, and I was supposed to start in September. But they hooked me up with this part-time job through the seminary. I said, we need a part-time job. And this Greek Orthodox pastor had the last couple of secretaries had been seminary students at the seminary. And he wanted seminary students because he didn't want gossip in the congregation if he had a female secretary. It's like, oh, okay, that's fine.
So there's another
That's what he
loaded
said.
question.
That's fine. You know, so I was his secretary for a year and a half. And he was a hoot to work for. He was a scream. Yeah, he was a wonderful guy, had a great sense of humor. But like I said, when they had the festival, we worked like crazy for about 2 weeks because we were producing an ad book, you know, like you get at basketball games, sometimes all these advertisements in it. So we were doing that to raise money and doing that. And the women were cooking in the kitchen and they were making baklava and shish kebabs and all this wonderful Greek stuff, and then bringing it in for us to sample.
Making
You
me
sure it's
hungry.
okay?
No, I better try it one more time.
I better try one more time.
A little light on the salt.
And he told me once, he said, I don't make baklava anymore because they're all jealous of my baklava. I said, really? He said, oh yeah, I make it really. They said, and one time they said, Pastor, or Father Peter, well, you don't understand. We think, you know, how come your baklava is so much better than ours? It just seems to be just a notch above ours. How can you, what do you do to it? He said, I have a secret ingredient you can't possibly provide. They're like, oh, but you have to tell us. And okay, fine, you've convinced me, he said. So I make the baklava, I put it on the baking sheet, I open the oven door, and after I push it in, before I close the door, I do this.
I knew it was going to be something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. But he was fun. So there we are. Okay. The other thing we probably should say is, you know, Lutherans have this kind of odd relationship with saints. They kind of make us uncomfortable. Let's say it that way. So we don't know how to talk about them because we don't want to seem like we're worshiping them or praying to them or anything like that. But Luther himself said, we really ought to keep the saints around because, at least they ought to serve as good role models for us. If you want to know what compassion looks like, read the stories of St. Francis in action, because then you'll see what compassion actually looks like in action. If you want to know what commitment looks like, read the stories of St. Francis. If you want to know what humility looks like, read the stories of Mary in action. And they serve as good role models for us. Should we pray to them? No. But, they're saints partly because of their faith that showed itself out in works. And if we want to see what that looks like, read the stories of the saints. Good King Wenceslas, that's one of them. We sing about good King Wenceslas at Christmas time, but don't conceive of him as one of the saints, but he is. So that's why we ought to keep them around and think about them and contemplate them and their lives and so forth. All right, any questions on Mary or any of those folks? Or no? Okay, well then let's talk about our Bible study this morning. Our God, Jesus, is compassionate, and our theme verse is, "Great is your mercy, O Lord." We're going to talk a little bit about this with the Sunday school this morning. But how would you, let's begin. How would you define compassion?
Loving, caring.
Okay.
Giving.
Mm-hmm. Understanding. Okay. That's closer to the root of it. If you break it down, what does compassion, the word, mean?
Google that, Heidi. Google that.
No, don't Google it. Don't Google it.
It means feeling what they're feeling.
Okay, it's even more
Feeling,
specific than that.
With passion, with, I don't know,
It means suffering with.
passion is
Putting yourself in
suffering.
their shoes.
Yeah, putting yourself in their shoes, to suffer
Okay.
with them. We talk about that,
the
and here's
passion
the
of
church word, like the
Jesus, okay.
passion of Jesus. It doesn't
All right.
mean his emoting, it means his suffering and death on the cross. Okay, that's the root word of passion, to suffer. And compassion means to suffer along with them. So that results in understanding, putting yourself in their shoes, that sort of stuff. Compassion is different than pity, because pity means you feel sorry for someone, but you don't actually feel what they're feeling. Okay? They look the same, right? But, it's like you see somebody, like a homeless person, and you give them $20. Is that pity or is that compassion? Well, if you don't have a knowledge or an inkling of what they're going through, then it's just pity. If you have some kind of inkling of what they're going through and what they're suffering, then it's compassion.
Well, the Oxford Dictionary says compassion is sympathetic pity and concern.
Yeah, what do they know?
Sympathetic pity and concerns for the sufferings or misfortunes of others.
Yeah, sympathetic is probably the key word there, It works itself out that it looks like pity, but, I think there's a way there could be pity without sympathy.
Like, do you want some wine with that cheese?
Yeah, you want some wine with that cheese, but,
Some cheese with
or
that
choose the wine.
Yeah.
Or, if you're walking down the street and you see somebody who is homeless and you give them a 20 because you look around and say, people over there are going to see me giving that 20 and they're going to think I'm a good guy, so I'll give them that 20. So that's pity without compassion. Okay? Compassion means you suffer with them. There's a word that is used in the Bible about Jesus that's often translated as compassion, but it means way more than that. And I won't tell you what the word is, but the Greek word means, basically, Jesus saw the sufferings of the people, and it's translated as he had compassion on them, but it really means he had a gut reaction, a gut-wrenching reaction. The word is very similar to the word, he saw their pitiful state, and his stomach turned, or did a flinch, okay? Because it's related to the stomach. And it means he had this reaction in his gut for them, not just in his mind. So where do you see people being compassionate?
I see it all the time at work, when I'm at work.
During tragedies.
Tragedies. How do you see it at work?
Well, just coming to express your sympathy at a tragic time when they've lost someone they love, and they're there with just being there, I guess.
Okay. How else? With tragedies, Heidi said, yeah.
I was thinking about Habitat for Humanity, where
Okay.
people take their time to build homes, and
To do for others.
or mission workers who go on a mission
Okay.
and help.
Okay.
And teaching, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
Teachers are very compassionate and always doing things for
Mhm.
the kids. And
Mm-hmm.
Here in our church.
Mm-hmm. Let's stick with teachers for a minute, because I think, I want to go here with this too. Teachers can be compassionate in their classrooms, and then what happens sometimes when the teacher gets home?
sometimes they've used up their compassion.
Sometimes you said they're compassionate.
And they're not
They
so
say,
compassionate.
I got nothing for you tonight. Get your own sandwich.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, but sometimes teachers carry it home with them, and they, and it eats at them, right? The dilemmas of their students, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
I had a point where I was thinking of adopting a little boy at one time,
Yeah.
and I felt so
Mm-hmm.
bad for his situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure. Sure. I want to go back to that word that is translated compassion with Jesus and his gut reaction. If you continue in that kind of environment and in that kind of situation where you're constantly compassionate, it does have sometimes a physical effect on you. Okay, think of all of the people who are in, ICUs right now, who are doctors and nurses, and, in this COVID thing. We've heard story after story of these people just, you can't leave it when you go home. It follows you when you go home. Not the virus, but the caring and the compassion, all that follows you. And if you're doing the same thing day after day after day after day, it has a physical effect on you, doesn't it?
You have to build a wall almost,
If you can,
if you can, yeah.
if you can, you have to build a wall. Sometimes you can't. Firefighters would be the same thing, if
Yeah.
you're out on runs every day.
That's what I mean, you have to build a wall almost.
Yeah. Otherwise,
Policeman.
you have to get out of the business.
And that affects you, I was gonna say from EMS too, but that affects you as the firefighter or the nurse or whatever in other ways. I mean, you could be looked at by other people as cold,
Oh,
because
yeah.
you're not feeling, but you feel in a different way. Or, like you said, the teachers that, if you build those walls, then there's a whole different perception or.
Well, if it's a solid wall, people can't see it.
Exactly, that's,
You're-
that's
you're
it.
feeling it.
A lot of people
That's
don't
a good
understand the
point.
situation.
Exactly, right,
That's one of the biggest problems.
right. right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Because they don't walk that walk.
Especially in things like that, you know, like,
Right.
you know, I used to go around fixing equipment in hospitals and stuff like that,
Oh, yeah.
you know? And you'd go in, the nurses would just, you know, where have you been? I called you 2 hours ago, I need to have this done. You know, and you look at them and go, what do you expect me to do? Just fly here? You know, I've got things to do. You know, and I used to get mad sometimes and stuff like that, you know, and, because, again, I didn't realize sometimes the situations they're in,
Right,
you know?
They needed that
Yeah,
machine.
until sometimes, you know, I've seen it sometimes, you know, and then realize, well, okay, I can understand, you know, something like that. Because you've got one person there, one nurse trying to get all of this done, their equipment's not working, the doctors are saying, you need to get this, you need this, and they got all these patients and stuff, you know, and it's like, so, you know.
right.
And the average
Until you
person,
understand,
they look at
yeah.
it and go, well, wow, she's mean.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, what
What's
kind
your
of nurse would
problem?
she be? Yeah.
Yeah, you
I
shouldn't
mean,
be in this field.
Right,
Yeah,
Come here, buddy,
exactly.
let me show you something.
Yeah.
You know, but, yeah.
yeah, it goes.
And sometimes I think they get burned out though too.
Oh,
Like,
yeah,
maybe
they do,
shouldn't-
very fast.
Yeah, maybe they shouldn't
Very
be
fast
doing
sometimes.
that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Alcohol and suicide.
Yep.
Well, and some of
Yeah.
it is, you know, it's like Larry said, building the wall, some of it is not, it's sometimes hard to get those boundaries in place and, you know, and figure out how firm it needs to be, you know, I mean, pastors do this a lot too.
Everybody does.
You know, everybody does.
Yeah, you
But
have
the
to
pastors
protect
do this a
yourself.
lot too, you know, the old-time pastors, some of the old-time pastors used to say, you know, you have to be professional, you can't let your emotions show, you can't let, you know, and I find myself that when, you know, when somebody from a funeral home calls me and says, can you come and do a funeral for somebody who's, you know, it's like, if I don't know them, if they don't know them, if they don't have a real, you know, it's like, I can do a funeral, you know, but there's no connection, you know, and I can generally do it pretty well, but there's not a connection. On the other hand, if I have a strong connection with, you know, there's sometimes when I've done funerals here where I just break down and I'm crying while I'm doing the funeral, you know, so I've said to pastors for a number of years, we should not be like doctors who put on the gloves to put a medication on a person. We should have bare hands when we do that so that we can get some of that medication ourselves and so that we can also feel the compassion. You know, it's not a bad thing to walk up to somebody and say, and look at them and realize my stomach is doing a flip-flop when I see their situation. It may not be a bad thing. Okay. In what instances should people be more compassionate?
I'd say every day.
Every day? Yeah, and I like Ed's example because, you know, you just never know what somebody else has been going through. And, you know, that causes them to be hurting and express that hurting somehow. You just never know. So, all right, let's look at a situation here in Mark chapter 7. We just got a few verses here. So the first couple are the setup. So verses 31 and 32 there. Somebody read those, please.
Then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went to sit down in the Sea of Galilee and into the region of Decapolis. There some people brought him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged Jesus to place his hand on him.
Okay, so first of all, a round of applause for Ed for reading all those Greek and Phoenician city names
That's why I was passing.
very
especially
well,
that
you know, very well.
Decapolis, that was
close?
good.
Good job,
yeah.
right on target.
Ooh.
Okay, so what particular details stick out to you about the man the people brought to Jesus?
He's deaf and he could hardly talk.
Deaf and could hardly talk. Okay. What sorts of challenges might he have faced in his life? Now remember, this is first century Judea. So what sort of challenges might he have faced in his life?
Couldn't use a telephone.
I'm sorry?
Couldn't use a telephone.
Couldn't use a telephone. Yeah.
You probably couldn't get a job.
Probably couldn't get a job, because he couldn't communicate.
So it would seem like he was just maybe a beggar.
A beggar.
Quite
He
possible.
was a throwaway.
Society, yeah.
A
Yeah.
throwaway, a beggar.
Push him off to the side and say, hey,
Fend for yourself.
out of my way.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I have no use for you, you can't communicate.
Which probably would have been, I'll say it this way. For any person whom these days we would say has any sort of a disability, any one of them would have been a throwaway or push off to the side. Yeah. Or they had poor eyesight, or, blind might not have been only just people who are totally no eyesight. It might have been people who, like me,
Diminished eyesight.
diminished eyesight, have really bad prescriptions, so.
He must have had a caring friend somewhere along the line, though, that brought him.
Why do you say that?
It could have been
Yeah, because
his
he
family.
couldn't, he was
couldn't
deaf, he
find his
couldn't
way.
talk, how would he have,
No seeing eye dog.
somebody had to care for him.
All right, now this guy was deaf though, so he could
Oh,
have
that's
seen
right.
it. He was
Oh,
deaf
right,
and could
deaf.
hardly talk.
Okay.
So there was somebody to bring him to Jesus, and what did that person do? What did those people do?
Beg.
They begged Jesus to place his hand on him. So they had a certain amount of compassion for him in their own hearts. Please, Jesus. Not just, oh, here's another deaf guy, would you do? But please, Jesus. Okay. All right, how about the next couple verses, 33, 4, and 5. It's Ephatha, by the way.
In case anyone was afraid.
After he took him aside away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to him, Ephatha, which means be opened. At this, the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly.
Okay, very good, thank you. All right, so what details about the text strike you about how Jesus performed this miracle?
Kind of different than his other ones.
In what way?
Well,
What
when
ways?
he, it touched a man's tongue,
He spit
and
touched
spit
the
and
Put
then
man's
his
touched his
fingers in
tongue.
his ears.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't need to do those things,
Mm-mm.
but he did it for the people
Yeah, the visual.
to know.
Why couldn't he just lay his hands on him?
He could have just spoken it.
Well, he looked to heaven this time.
Maybe he
Was
just
brought to
wanted to
his
show the
attention.
people,
Yeah.
just something.
I don't
Because a
think-
lot of the people were disbelief in everything anyways. It's hard to say.
But I don't think that's the case. on
Okay.
this. I don't think any of that's the case on this one. What's the first thing he did?
Took him aside.
Took him
Away
aside,
from the
away from the people.
Crowd.
Away from the crowd.
So this wasn't a miracle, I mean, this, in the usual sense, he did miracles in front of everybody, right? I mean, it's just the whole crowd.
Yeah.
Put your hand, this one he took him away from the crowd. So I don't think he was doing this for
For the
the
crowd.
crowd.
Maybe for the man.
He was doing it for the man. So he took him off to the side. And if you have a guy in those days who is both deaf and could hardly speak, how do you communicate what you're gonna do? You come up and you're gonna put your hand on him, and what is he gonna think? Oh, here's somebody else who's gonna smack me around or whatever. Okay? You take him off to the side, and you start by acknowledging his handicap. Put your finger on his ears. I think Jesus in the first verse is basically using sign language to communicate with this guy. Here's what we're gonna do. How's he supposed to say to him? Let's go off to the side. Ephatha.
And his ears first, so that he
His
so
ears.
he
Could
could
hear
do the
what's
next
going
step.
on.
Yeah, so he could get the next step.
Yeah, right. I think that's basically what Jesus is doing. He's using sort of a sign language to communicate to this guy, I'm gonna do something for these, and for this, Ephatha. Does that make sense? Okay, and I think he pulled the guy aside so that the guy would understand that Jesus was doing this for him. At this, the man's ears were open, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. Then he sends it back to his friends, and then they're all like, oh, that's what happened. So it worked. Okay. What is this, okay, let's back off for a minute before we flip the page. What does this tell you about the nature of Jesus' compassion and care for his creation?
Well, I guess the nature part was that he took him aside, that, that was a private thing? or-
Yes. Jesus is compassionate for each one, not just for all of us. It's an individual thing as well as for everybody. Jesus has care and compassion for each individual.
And
whatever.
each individual's disability,
Right.
Like the hearing,
Sure,
the speaking,
Right.
he was specific in
Mhm.
that individual disability, if you
Right.
will.
Specific compassion for that specific person, not just a blanket.
Right, be healed, yeah.
Yep,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
yep. All right, now we can look at the back page. 36 and 37, somebody please read those.
Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone, but the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. People were overwhelmed with amazement. He has done everything well, they said. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak.
Okay, very good, thank you. So let's ask this question. What does the crowd's response show about what they do and do not understand about Jesus' purpose on earth?
They were overwhelmed with amazement.
Mm-hmm. And it certainly would be an amazing thing. But what do they not understand about Jesus' purpose on earth?
Not to tell anyone. They did. The more he told them to not tell anyone, the more they kept talking about it.
Right, and why did Jesus not want them to tell anyone?
He didn't want to be known as the miracle worker. He wanted to be known as the Savior.
Right. Very good. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yep. That's right. He came to be the Savior, not the miracle worker. And the performance of miracles was, the disciples did miracles too in the book of Acts, but it's real clear in Acts that the reason they did miracles was so that they could draw a crowd and then preach the gospel. Okay? That's why they were doing it. Jesus wasn't ready to preach the gospel in the same way they were, but he was doing miracles to build up evidence that he actually was the Savior. And they were not understanding that. How do people today run into the same issues with Jesus?
They only go to him if they have a problem,
Yeah, only go to
Yeah.
him if they have a problem.
Yeah,
or, only look to him or focus on it.
Yeah,
they want him to be
Whatever.
the fixer.
the fixer.
And those that don't are still of the mindset seeing is believing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, they look to him like, I like the fixer one. I've heard it said like the butler, God is supposed to take care of me. What, like, Mr. Belvedere or something, or your housekeeper? God is, that's not the point of Jesus. Yeah, he's the Savior. Okay, any further thoughts on this passage?
It's hard to know what to believe about these people that lay on hands and
Yeah.
supposedly heal people now.
Yeah,
My sister is a Pentecostal
mm-hmm,
type Christian, and they do a lot of that sort of thing in her churches.
yeah. And, it's hard to know.
It is. These Benny Hinn and some of these people that supposedly heal people. I don't know. I can't say it's not true, but I can't exactly say it is true either, I guess.
Yeah, and and there are, but here's the thing. You mentioned Benny Hinn. Somebody like him, who made a whole ministry on healing, also, attracted scandal, and was, there was some scandal that plagued his ministry, financial scandal.
Yeah.
But people who have ministries that aren't healing based also attract scandal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's been other televangelists who have not had a healing based ministry, and they've been investigated and deposed and whatever and whatnot. And, and forgot what I was going to say. So, I mean, okay, I know what I was going to say. So I think I want to go back to what I said about the disciples in the book of Acts. I think it's possible to say that there is, like with the disciples, there is a place for healing in the church if that is the will of the Holy Spirit. But the purpose of healing is not to establish a healing ministry. The purpose of healing is to preach the gospel. So if people are going to come to hear the gospel, and it's healing that's going to draw them there, and you get a chance to preach the gospel, then okay. But if people are only coming to be healed, then something's got to change. That's what it was for St. Paul. Okay? I mean, people came and he healed a couple of them, but he was like, no, I'm here to preach the gospel. I'm not here to heal everybody. And the same was true with Peter and John. We're here to speak about Jesus. But I think there are guys who build healing ministries where the focus is healing and not about salvation. Does that make some sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because people are just desperate for the healing part.
Mm-hmm.
That's, if they have a small hope, wouldn't you say that's gonna bring them to?
And I don't disagree with that. I think that there are a lot of people who are desperate for the healing. And that's fine, but I think there's a temptation among those guys, among some people who have that sort of ministry, to say, wow, people are coming, so let's make healing the centerpiece of this ministry, and then they lose sight of the fact that Jesus ought to be the centerpiece of the ministry.
Well, I have to say I'm skeptical of anything that's on the media.
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah, right,
I mean,
so-
granted, there could be healing, which I don't discount it, but when you have to put on a show to do it, and you know how everything is manipulated in the media, how much of that is actual and how much is staged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you have something that's done privately, then I'm more apt to understand it and deal with it.
Yeah.
But to turn on the television and watch these people be healed and they walk away and do whatever, it's like, I'm sorry,
But isn't it is it Joel, the dark hair?
Joel Osteen.
Joel.
Now, he doesn't really do healing,
No.
but the crowd that he,
Yeah.
Right, and that's a different situation. Well, let me pull this back away from Joel and Benny and those guys for a minute here. So a while back, this is my point. A while back, we had this opportunity, and we got this kit of material called Divorce Care, and it was basically to help Christians who are working through divorce and to provide an environment for them to think about it in a Christian way and so forth. And and it looked good and everything was good. And when I did it, it was a good program. But the publicity for the program said, use this for your church. It will help people who've been through divorce. It will help people who are going through divorce. It will help people who are contemplating divorce. And as word gets out, more people will come to your church. And I thought, I'm not using this program to get people to church. I'm just not doing that. We're going to do it for its purpose. And I think that's the point of the whole healing thing. I wouldn't want healing to be the focus. I want Jesus to be the focus. And how we're going to talk to people about Jesus. And to tell the honest truth, without having a healing focused ministry, I've gone to plenty of hospital rooms and prayed for people to be healed. Sometimes I even put my hands on them. Okay? And oftentimes God heals them. Not in a real miraculous way where suddenly they sit up in bed and start ripping their IVs out of their arms, but God heals them and they're back in church within a week or so. That's where I see God healing people, but I don't see that as a focus of ministry. Okay. So, anyway. All right, let's look at the stuff on the bottom. Nancy and Dan have seen this before because we've been working on this together. This is what I was talking about. So here's a little graphic that we have this little group that's been meeting and thinking and saying, as we think about life here at Christ the King, what do the values of Christ the King seem to be to us? And we threw out a whole bunch of stuff and then picked it all up and sorted it into 4 categories: caring, acceptance, family, and joy. So the question here is, how well, if at all, does this graphic describe the values of Christ the King Lutheran Church? What seems to be to you, what seems to be important here at Christ the King? Caring, acceptance, family, and joy.
I'd say a combination of everything.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Because how can you have caring and not end up with joy at some point?
Okay. Good. Anybody else? Dan and Nancy, you can comment on it too, even though
What did you say?
you
We
said
can
it.
comment if we want to.
Oh, okay.
You may if you wish.
Okay, I'll look at the notes.
Oh, you've got to know.
When did you get that folder?
Pastor Gail gave it to me.
Wayne asked me to print, I sent those guys to you in the email, and Wayne said, why don't you print them all out? I was like, okay, fine, I'll just print them out for everybody.
Yeah, it's right here.
There it is.
The values of Christ the King Lutheran Church are acceptance, caring, family. Acceptance is because we confess that we are sinners saved by grace. We accept that every person we meet has the potential to know that they are saved by God's grace also. Do you want me to read all these?
If you want to read all of them.
Caring, because Jesus healed the sick, cleansed the lepers, made the lame to walk, and more. Christ the King folks engage in activities and projects that demonstrate care for the physical, emotional, and economical concerns of others.
Hey, let me just pause you there for a moment. When we did this in a workshop, we said, what have we noticed about Christ the King over the last 30 years or so? Not what do we hope is going to happen in the future, but this is who we actually are. And that's what we observed. Okay? If you think if you think we're something different, then let us know, because we don't want to give a false impression. But go ahead, Nancy.
Family, Christ the King folks treasure the children and cherish the elderly among us. Dan. and treat one another with love and concern as brothers and sisters in the same family of Christ. That's because of the breakfast remark. Yeah, we're even now.
No, we're not.
Save it for home, you guys.
Yeah,
Don't hang out your dirty laundry.
yeah.
You still got that divorce?
Yeah.
I'm not too worried about that.
That's good.
You have
That
good
was good,
foresight.
Larry. That was good, Larry. That was good. Okay, and then the final one was joy, because Christ the King, folks, know that our salvation is accomplished and promised to each and every one of us. We know that our joy in this life is just a small taste of joy that is to come.
Okay, thank you.
Sums it up.
There.
Okay, so, think that works for you guys? Okay. Can you think of any specific examples, either in individuals, and I gave you a big one this morning,
Yeah.
or in projects, I gave you another big one this morning, or events we've done over the years? Any examples that you can think of that come quickly to mind in any one of these four areas?
I'd say the blanket projects.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even those show up who, they say, well, I can't do this, but I can do this.
Right.
That's like,
Right.
fine.
Mm-hmm.
Or even with the book bags, I don't know how to sew, but I can, is there something I can do?
Yeah.
Contribution, yeah. Assemble.
Mm-hmm.
The work camp that we had.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked a little bit about our bereavement meals we made.
Mm-hmm.
Even our fellowship meals, like our
Yeah.
chili cook-off or whatever. I
Right.
mean, that shows all of these
Church picnic.
things, because usually we have a collection that's going to help a family or
Mhm.
something like that.
Well, that's what I like, is all the meals we do with the collection
Mhm.
goes to families.
Mm-hmm.
Families or groups, certain groups like children or whatever.
Mhm.
Good, thank you. All right, let's look at the one at the bottom, and this is the one that was kind of embedded in the gospel lesson this morning in the printout. What a dedicated disciple of Jesus looks like, and I talked about this too. They go low in humility, live out in mission and service to others, and lift up others in joy. So what do you think about that graphic? You think that's... Okay, Joanne just left.
Was it
Had to
something
be
we
some-
said?
I doubt it. Be
Well,
someplace.
she had
She had
said
to
she
be
could
someplace
only,
else.
Yeah.
she had said she can only stay a while.
Oh, okay, all right, that's fine. So what do you think about this graphic and this idea that this is what a dedicated disciple of Jesus looks like? Here at Christ the King.
Kind of sums it all up.
Yeah, okay, who do you know, or who have you known, who kind of fits this description, whether it's here at Christ the King or someplace else in your life?
I think of my mom.
Okay,
She was definitely a lift up. She was just compassionate, kind, and
mm-hmm,
Who that?
Hmm?
Who's
my mom.
your mom?
I think of Bev's Aunt Bunny. She's always been, she's one of those ladies that just, her faith just kind of flows out of her, and it's genuine. It's not like a fake thing. I've never sensed it as being fake. It's been a genuine faith. Everything she says, and she's very biblical, and she's prayerful, and, every time she sends a card, she sends us an anniversary card, and there's like 3 sheets of paper folded in there that are covered with inspirational Bible studies, sermon
Bibles,
things,
yeah.
quotes, and whatnot. She's always done that.
Yeah, you look at it and say, should we open this now?
But do we have time?
Or when we have time, you know. Yeah, she's a wonderful lady. She's
Yeah.
a wonderful person.
How old is she, Bev?
85.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she's
Yeah,
85
yeah.
plus. So-
Does she print that out on a computer or?
Oh, yeah, she
Yeah.
prints it on a computer. Or I don't know, maybe she has a whole file cabinet. Let's see, anniversaries. Here it is.
She might.
I don't know.
A file folder.
She
Yeah.
has something like that, I think, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing to be
Yeah.
that with it yet at 85,
Mhm.
you know?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'd have to say my Aunt Carol, because I can call her at any time, and she's always there for me. She knows what I go through with the family, because she went through it she married into the Swingelberg family, so she sees what I see, and
Mm-hmm.
You have a common bond, huh?
yeah.
Yeah.
And she's the only aunt, well, now I only have 3 aunts left, but she's always the go-to one.
You're lucky. I have no aunts. You have no aunts.
Not alive.
Anybody else you can think of that you have known or do know who fits this description? Besides Leona and these people?
I'd have to say Pam.
Rosa?
Pam.
Pam Reese.
I think she was one that came to mind too.
You?
Me?
You,
Okay, thank
definitely
you.
you.
Thank you.
I take it for granted that he's at the top of the
Yeah.
list.
No,
It's a given, it's a given,
Yes,
huh?
yes.
no.
Yeah, you're our example.
You know, I see it in different people in different ways, and I think of different people, like I can't remember her name, the girl at Prince of Peace who would collect blankets for a long period of time, and then
For the homeless.
when the winter came, her and her husband would go out into Cleveland and find the homeless and distribute the blankets to each one of them. She never made a big deal out of it. Only she would make an announcement, you know, if you can donate a blanket or 2, here's what it would go for. But she did it religiously, and I think about her.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I think about Dennis Rincars. He comes from a different way of doing things, but he is amazing when it comes to doing something for somebody else. He will not even hesitate. And then I think of John Taranowski. He is so giving. I know he's gruff and a little rough around the edges, but the things he does for other people is amazing. He never talks about it. You find out about it some other. I didn't know
He's
he ever did
humble.
that.
He is humble.
Yeah, he's extremely humble. But you'll find out somebody will mention something. Oh yeah, Taranowski does this, or he gave money for this or that. I've known him for 35 years. I never knew that. And Dennis Rincars is the same way. And I've only known him for a few years. Yeah, Ed's the same way.
Yeah.
He just sits there.
Yes.
He does so much for the church, and
And he
people don't
won't
realize
tell
how
And
much.
then no one knows, yeah.
But
That's
all of a sudden,
humble.
somebody, something that's
Somebody
broken,
says,
all of a
"This is
sudden it's
fixed."
fixed, and nobody figures out who did
Yeah.
it, but we know who did it.
Well, and this is one of the things we were discussing. We had a team meeting last week with, we have a facilitator, Pastor Jacob Hoyer, who's one of our guys in Florida. And Dan brought up the question, because we're talking about where, how do we look forward in the future at Christ the King? And so Jacob had said, well, there are measures to do this or this. And Dan is like, how do we know, if we say this is what we're doing, how do we know if we're succeeding? How do we measure it? And the answer of how do we measure our success is, what do we have to look at? If Like if you look at the cornfield, wherever there's a cornfield, that's or beans, okay? If you look at a
Beans.
bean field around, but a cornfield. I said, you know, most of us have looked at the cornfields this year and say, oh, there's corn. And then, is it gonna be knee-high by the 4th of July? And then it's got tassels, and then, oh, they're combining it already. That's the only measure that we have. But a farmer will look at it and say, am I gonna get more yield this year per acre than I did last year? You know, that he's got a different measure. So what are the measures that we use? And we said, we have never tallied stuff here at Christ the King.
Because it's
You know,
done.
so we don't really know how many people total worked on blankets. Because we've never
I've
taken
never
attendance.
taken a list.
We've never, I mean, we used to do that when we had to do Thrive in Action things, right? And you had people sign in, and we're like, oh, we hate that, because nobody wants to sign in, and nobody wants to say, I did this many hours, except for Thrive In, we would do that. But so many people do so much stuff, and there's so many people around here who are like, you know, if you're gonna buy a tank of gas for the tractor, would you turn in your receipt? No, I'll come out of pocket. I don't know how much out of pocket stuff has gone on in the yards over the years here.
Thousands.
Thousands
At
of dollars
least,
out of pocket stuff, you know, including, you know, when Glenn Shiverdagger used to pay for True Green to come, you know, so we'd have minimal dandelions, you know, it was like, nobody knew that, I knew it, but, you know, but that's kind of the way it is around here. It's like, how are we gonna measure how are we gonna measure how we're going in the future if nobody says, this is what's actually happened? Because we just don't do that.
Yeah.
You
Absolutely
know,
true.
nobody cares to know that. I mean, nobody cares.
That's
to
not the important thing.
That's not the
I know.
important thing to
That's
us.
right.
So that might be a struggle, you know, as we go along to say, how are we gonna know when we're actually getting better at it? We might just have to look at, like we do a cornfield and say, we're starting to see tassels or whatever, you know?
I think that's a good struggle though, but better than someone standing out and say, look what
Yeah.
I did
Yeah.
this, you know?
Like what you said in your sermon this morning.
Yeah. Although there is a, I've kind of gone around about this with some of the other pastors. I'll tell you this, with some of the other pastors. I have a website that's a personal website, because Nate has one, and I got this idea from Nate, our son Nate. Nate has actually, it's a personal professional website that is basically his qualifications and publications and stuff that he's done. So that, you know, anybody who wants to know what area is Nate an expert in, they can see what he's published, okay? And I thought, that's not a bad idea. So I have a personal professional website that has a running list of the continuing education courses I've taken probably the past 10 years, okay? And I do that, I'm not gonna share it with you guys, but not because I'm ashamed of it, because you don't need it, but I do that because every once in a while somebody says, well, Cahill, you know, what have you been working on? And I give them the website and they say, this is what it is. And I do that partly also because, not that I'm in danger of getting a call from another congregation that says, come and be our pastor, because, you know, I'm old.
That's it, we pray for you.
You know, but I did have a conversation with a congregation several years ago who said, you know, we want you to come and specifically do this ministry with us. And I said, I'm not the guy for that ministry. That's not what I do. And I sent them the link to this website and said, this is what I've been focused on for the last 10 years in terms of continuing education. And I really do believe that if you have a pastor who's focused in this area, he's just, you know, he's not a generalist anymore. He's a lot more specific. Well, some of the other pastors like, oh, you shouldn't track your continuing education. You should take continuing education, but you shouldn't put it out there. You shouldn't tell people. You should just, it's like boasting. You know, this is what we said the other day, right? We shouldn't measure because it's like boasting. And it's like, I don't know that it's boasting as much as saying, this is the direction that I've been going. And, you know, for this congregation, it's probably not a bad idea to say, what direction have we been going for the last 10, 20, 30 years? So that when the occasion comes for another pastor to come in whenever that's going to be, whether it's before or after Larry dies, I don't know. But, you know, so that when that pastor is saying to this congregation, what are you guys like, what have you been doing for the last 20 or 30 years, we can say, we've been doing this, but we haven't been doing that. And if that pastor wants to do that, maybe he should at least be honest and say, that I'm not coming here while you're doing this. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think it would be considered boasting if you posted a running list here, on the bulletin board.
Yeah,
Here, look what I've done.
Look at me.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if anybody actually wants to know, I'll give you the link and you can look it up, but I'm not, you know, but it's also for my own benefit, because I look at it and go, oh yeah, I remember that. Oh yeah, I remember that. Oh yeah, I remember that.
I haven't really been slacking off at all.
No, it's not about times of slacking off, it's I remember what that was all about, you know, so.
Well, sometimes some of the smaller projects you forget,
Right.
and it's like, oh yeah, I did do that.
Well, and the other part is just because it's me, and you know how I can be sometimes. But we're supposed to,
That was good.
you know,
You
pastors are
expounded on
supposed to fill out a self-evaluation tool every year, and the self-evaluation tool comes from Synod. And there's a section in Synod, what's your continuing education been like this past year? And they only give you room to put in courses that you've actually taken from the seminary. So it's like you take seminary continuing education course, but there's a whole lot of other stuff out there that we've been learning over the years and that I've learned over the years. And so it's like,
It doesn't come from LCMS.
it doesn't come from the Missouri Synod or
Yeah.
the seminaries.
Yeah.
But it's still, for me, it's continuing education, you know, a lot of it has to do with counseling and community issues and so forth. So I've now started to put the link to that website in there. This is where my continuing education lives, so. So, that's one of my grudges about the way the Missouri Synod operates. Ooh, I should turn the recording off. I don't care. I don't care.
That was like, what was that? Was it on Funniest Home Videos that the couple was sitting there, husband and wife, and sharing how proud they were of their kids at another state that was their anniversary. They were so
They were
proud of it.
Zooming.
Yeah, and they were zooming back and forth. And they said goodbye, and she forgot to turn it off, and they both got up, and he had shorts on. Then he had a suit and tie on.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
he
yeah,
thought he
yeah,
was
shorts.
jockeys, you know. It's like, oh, I forgot to turn it off.
And she's saying, oh, I think that went well, but what about, and then, ooh.
Yeah.
The kids are still watching.
Yeah. They probably did that deliberately, but I promise I have slacks on today.
Good. Bev wouldn't have handled anything else, I'm sure.
No, that's true. All right. Okay, let's close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good Feast of the Assumption.